Hi, I'm Kim Eddleston with FamilyBusiness.org, and today I'm here with Larry Hause, who's a nationally recognized family business transition consultant, lawyer, and author who specializes in helping owners resolve difficult and seemingly impossible challenges. Growing up in a family business, Larry learned firsthand the benefits and challenges of being part of a family-owned company. And for the last 34 years, he has helped family business owners with transitions. And today, we'll be talking about some lessons from his amazing book, The Balance Point. Thank you for being with me today, Larry.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks for having me.
So, what are some of the common misconceptions family business owners have about boards that prevents them from implementing them and using boards?
Some of it is just anecdotal. So they see boards working on TV or in the movies, and they don't like what they see. And then just in the papers, some of the examples that they read about corruption in boards or boards falling asleep at the wheel. A lot of my business clients, they've sat on boards. It's either their church board or nonprofit board. And I mean, they understand that it's nonprofit, right? But they just see a tremendous amount of inefficiencies in the boards. I mean, a lot of talking and not a lot of decision making. And entrepreneurs, they're used to making decisions. Another board that several clients sit on are like bank boards. And bank boards are just different. They're different than private company boards. There's so much regulatory work that a bank board needs to do. The business owners that have had that experience say, well, we don't operate that way, and we don't want to operate that way. Underneath of everything, it's a big change, and they're concerned about losing control, I would say.
So how does your book address many of these misconceptions?
Almost all my clients are like first generation going to second. And when I mean first generation, there's a primary decision maker, right? There's the entrepreneur that pretty much is the center of everything and makes everything go. When I ask people or ask that person, what do they do that's really important for the company and makes their company successful, they'll rattle off a whole list. And almost all of those things can go under management. And then I ask them, well, what do you do as an owner? They're stumped. So what I start out with is I say, entrepreneur, most of what you do is as managers, and that's what everybody realizes. But what you also do is what owners do, and you do what a board does. What a board is doing here is helping management and owners identify their interests and then adjust their interests to come to an alignment. And every successful business has what I call this balancing authority, this balance point. And that's what these entrepreneurs do. It's probably their greatest gift. They balance everybody's interests, whether it's in the family, whether it's in management, whether it's between themselves personally or their business. They balance things all the time. They keep the wheels on the bus. They keep everybody going in the same direction, on the same page. That's their gift. And that's how I define the role of the board.
You suggest that it's really much more advisory based versus taking over control.
Substantive decisions rest either with management or ownership. The board does not make substantive decisions. They own the process. They make process decisions. In other words, the board is making sure management does its job. Owners are doing the job that owners do. And that those two groups have to adjust their interests here to get on the same page. So a board is more like a mediator than an arbitrator. They're not there to manage the business. They're there to make sure that management and ownership are on the same page and those interests are aligned.
So in your book, you actually present 7 alternative board structures. Can you tell us a little bit about them and how families can choose the right one?
Before you get to the 7 alternatives, though, everybody needs to understand, why do we have a board? And then how does a board work with management? How does a board work with ownership? So those are some preliminary questions. So the first 3 are basically advisory boards in nature. That is, the entrepreneur, the main person, the driver here is really the board. It's the board of one. They get advice in 3 different ways. Sometimes they get advice just very random. Alternative 1 is, they have some buddies, friends, they meet with their lawyer or accountant once a year. They get some input when and as needed, and is very ad hoc. Second, this alternative board is still getting advice from other people, but it's a little bit more regular. So they might have a coffee group here among other business owners that meet once a month, for example, or once a quarter. And then the third is more of a formal advisory board where the advisory board members and the board of one meet on a regular basis. Maybe it's monthly, maybe it's quarterly, and they have an agenda and so on. It would be like a regular board meeting here. It's just that the participants are advisory board members. So then we get into real boards of directors. And of course, that only happens when the entrepreneur is willing to give him or her authority away, right? I mean, a voting authority, willing to share that, right? I mean, I think an advisory board arrangement here, particularly alternative board 3, where you have some type of advisory board that's meeting on a fairly routine basis, is a great way to start transitioning. So the entrepreneur can comment and evaluate and direct management and ownership from a board seat, but it creates space for the others to learn how to be managers and owners. Well, you can do 4 types of real boards where you're sharing vote. You can have a board with all insiders, owners or managers. That is so common. I mean, if I have a board, I mean, if I'm having a client and they say they have a board, almost without question, their board is all insiders. And they say it's a real board, fiduciary board, and legally it is, but it functions as a level 3 board or level 2 board. That is, the entrepreneur is still making all the decisions. I mean, that so happens a lot.
You're not getting the full benefits, correct?
Yeah, and the danger of that, particularly if owners are sitting on the board, like your children, you bring your children on the board, then the entrepreneur increases expectations among your children. And then the first time they want to disagree with dad or mom, the entrepreneur, they get their hopes dashed. And then they get upset. And that affects commitment. The other 3 levels of boards, alternatives 5, 6, and 7, is when you start bringing in outsiders. And when might you do that, right? I mean, well, is when you want to get out of your own bubble. You're probably going to have some outside directors to help evaluate your managers and protect your managers from your kids who are owners who don't work in the business. Now, we know that they're connected, so we have to have a way to connect them when we connect owners and managers through the board. But it needs to be regulated. There needs to be a clear communication process and feedback loops to do that effectively so that managers manage the business and owners don't. But managers respond to the interest of owners and don't ignore owners. You can either have a board with minority outsiders, right? More insiders than outsiders, or more outsiders than insiders, or all outsiders. And which of those you choose really mostly all depends on the power dynamics in the ownership group. Okay, so you can deal with the ownership group that has distrust of family members working in the business. But if you have a fully independent board, you can live with that distrust, and then you can change that. You might start out with having no insiders on the board just because of this distrust issue. But 5 years later, when G3 is involved and they're working better, you might have owners on the board. You might have the CEO on the board. I mean, it doesn't mean forever.
So what do you say to those who think the board will reduce their control and authority? How do you convince them to consider adopting and implementing one of these boards?
Yeah, I tell them that the danger of losing control is real. You will lose control if you don't do 2 things. One is you need to have an owner plan. Managers have management plans. They have a strategic plan, business plan, annual operating plan, whatever you might call it, right? But when board members are sitting on the board and they're reviewing whatever management does, looking at their plans, approving their plans or whatever, if the owners are not clear about what the owners want, then the board has nothing to evaluate management's position except what they think is the best thing. And that's where you lose control. So owners need to do an owner plan. So I have my ownership groups do an owner plan every year. They update it, they present it to the board, and that solidifies to the board what owners want. that becomes a benchmark. So it's not that owners always get what they want. So it's important for you to hold the vision and the values and those objectives there. So that's one way you lose control. The second way is you don't train your board. What I'm talking about is not a public company board. When you look at most of the literature out there, it focuses on the relationship between a board and managers here. And owners are largely ignored. When you get directors, you bring in directors here from the outside. That's the model you can assume that they will have. So they're not thinking about owners at all.
Really nice. So last piece of advice.
What succession and transition is identifying what it is that the primary decision makers do and how do you transition every one of those functions. And you have three main functions. You got management function, ownership function, and you have this balancing function. And usually you cannot find one single individual to do all those functions in the next generation. And I would say this too, is that if you want, as an entrepreneur, if you want to maintain control, which most of them do, you want to make sure this baby is well tended and taken care of and people are prepared and will do right by what you built, retain the board seat. Whether it's an advisory board or not, retain the board seat because you can allow other people to practice, learn what they need to do, but you maintain that balance and authority where you can align various interests. You can evaluate people's interests and align them. And I really think it's important that the families own their own succession. They might work with advisors and the like, but bring your own critical thinking to the table. And this book hopefully will equip family business owners with the background that they need to be critical thinkers of their own transition.
Thank you for all your advice and obviously all the assistance you've given family businesses over the last, 34 years.
Well, thank you, Kim. I appreciate you having an interest in the book and all the work that you're doing for family businesses too. Thank you.